we're moving in the opposite direction. And so we're able to come into a place where our mental and emotional and physical senses begin to come back together, and especially if we pay attention to the changes in sensation that the medicine brings us.
Men are like there for service. This is why our bodies are able to lift heavy loads, push heavy loads, take a lot of manual labor, right? Because, you know, strength is a key component of masculinity and being a male.
There are these great warriors called the Fina, who are the defenders of the land and of the people. And they had to be skilled. They had to be strong. They had to be agile. They had to be able to recite 100 poems from memory. They had to have wisdom. They had to have judgment. And they had to have knowledge of the forest.
I focus heavily on mindset, meditation, consciousness, spirituality, and then obviously the diet and nutrition combined with the exercise is a holistic package. So they get transformations physically, mentally, and spiritually. Hey Conscious Man 7 family, quick question before we start. Do you love the depth of these conversations but hate when ads break the flow? I get it. Ads can feel like speed bumps on a highway, pulling you out of that deep zone. That's why we created a way for you to enjoy every episode completely ad-free while supporting the show at the same time. For just a few bucks a month on Patreon or Locals, you'll get full access to uninterrupted episodes. You'll get direct access to me so you can ask me any questions that you have, some cool other perks like early releases, and you'll also help us keep bringing you the powerful conversations that mainstream platforms won't touch. The link is in the show notes. Join us there and be part of this movement. Ever look up and see those dull, grey skies streaked with chemtrails and you feel your energy sink? You're not imagining it. Something in you knows the sky isn't supposed to look that way. But what if you could bring back the blue? What if there was a way to clear the air inside you and above you? That's where the Chembo comes in. They create powerful orgonite, tools that generate orgone energy, the life force that helps neutralize EMFs from your mobile phone, your Wi-Fi, and even 5G. It's nature's way of restoring balance, bringing cleaner air, calmer energy, and deeper sleep. Every piece from the Chembo is handmade, from tactical tower busters to beautiful pyramids and jewelry, crafted with the precise ingredients to generate real orgone energy. And here's the best part. They've proven it. For over 10 years, they've cleared thousands of miles of chemtrails, bringing the blue back to the skies around the world. So if you're ready to take back your weather and your well-being, go to thechembo.com. Use coupon code CM7 for 10% off and experience the shift for yourself. Don't fear the chemtrails or the EMF. Be empowered with the Chembo and never feel helpless again. If you are new to this podcast, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and to share because that helps us to be recommended in the algorithms. If you would like to support this podcast, please check out our merch store on Amazon with the brand Todd and Me. We've got some cool t-shirts, tank tops, hoodies, and sweaters. Link will be in the description of this podcast. And if you're now starting a spiritual journey, you would like to start a spiritual journey, or you're currently on a spiritual journey and you would like some help removing some fears and traumas, please hit me up on my Instagram at Adriano_246 and it will help you to get some magic mushrooms. Enjoy the show and stay tuned because we have some more great content coming soon. What if the strength you build in the gym is the same strength that roots your soul in the earth? What if the herbs growing in your backyard aren't just medicine, but messengers of the divine? Hello friends, welcome back to the Conscious Man 7 podcast. I am your host Todd Cave, and today we're joined by Seán Pádraig O'Donoghue, a man who bridges the ancient and the modern, the mythic and the physical. From journalist and human rights activist to herbalist, poet, and teacher of the old ways, Seán's journey is one of awakening to the living world itself. His books, Courting the Wild Queen and The Silver Branch and the Other World, remind us that healing isn't just about the body, it's about remembering who we are, where we come from, and how we belong to the earth. In this conversation, we'll explore how plants can be teachers, how myth and muscle merge, and how true power comes from aligning body, heart, and spirit. Stay tuned, because this one will take you deep into the roots of healing, strength, and the secret wild.
When truth is blurred by lies and misinformation, perception becomes reality. What will you perceive your reality to be?
Liberate your fears and walk with me.
Sit down and meditate. Connect with your soul.
Be a monster and then learn how to control it.
You gotta be willing to do the work.
So it really goes really deep in terms of words and etymology and what they mean. So this is why it is really hard to really crack the matrix, because there's so many levels and layers to it, Seán, welcome to the Conscious Man 7 podcast. How are you today, mate?
I'm very well. Thank you so much for having me here today. So happy to be connecting with you.
Yeah, same here. And, I found your story a little bit interesting because you talked about merging muscle and, fitness with, spirituality, and then also talking about the land, marrying the land, and you wrote a couple of books. So I thought it was a quite interesting take, because I also talk about, if you want to improve yourself in all facets, I think the first place you should start is your body, because the body is temple. You take it everywhere with you. And in that body, when you start to get into shape, you have challenges to do it. And it's very similar to life, like how you have life challenges. So I thought, it'd be quite interesting to talk to you today, because you're the man that talks about herbs a lot and stuff like that. So let's dive right in.
All right.
So Seán, before the herbs, the rituals, and the myths, there was a journalist and activist. What moment cracked open that shift from reporting about the world to entering a living relationship with it?
Well, I was at a point where my physical health and my mental health were really in pretty bad shape. I felt like I had devoted everything just to trying to change the world around me. But I had been ambivalent about being here as a person living in a body, and especially as a man living in a body in this world. And the ways in which I had ignored and subverted myself were really catching up with me. And also, I had really tried pretty much everything I could imagine to try to bring political change, from meeting with public officials to public education to being arrested blocking the entrances to weapons plants to going into places where people were suffering to gather their stories and bring their stories back. And none of it made sense. And so I made a prayer to be broken open. And even when you don't understand certain prayers, the universe does and answers them in ways that you probably would have never wished for if you had understood exactly what was happening, but also were the completely necessary answer. And so I found myself in Oaxaca in the wake of the uprising that came from the teachers' strike. And I was witnessing people who had next to nothing, who were fighting for their dignity and their culture and their connection to their ancestors and their community and their land. And I recognized something incredibly powerful there. And I also realized the ways in which I was completely disconnected from those kinds of realities. And that while all of those things were beautiful concepts to me, I had no direct experience of living in that way. And it really broke my heart open. And being with people who were in hiding because of the ways that they had put their own lives on the line to speak the truth, and hearing the ways that their ancestors and their relationship with the mountains, their relationship with the corn, sustained them. I recognized there was something really profoundly missing that I think I had known all my life was profoundly missing, but had never really been able to name. And then the night that I arrived back home, I uncharacteristically went to a dinner party in Boston. Not the kind of thing I would normally do, even on my best of days. And there I was, completely disoriented and broken wide open. And so I was really out of my element when I found myself there. But there was a woman there whose presence felt different than anybody else's. And when I eventually began speaking with her, I talked with her about what I had just been experiencing in Oaxaca and about the people's connection with the corn. And she told me that she was an herbalist and that she was working to help women connect with their own bodies and with the plants and to find ways to reclaim their own health. And I recognized, oh, here is something of that same flow, that same current, that same spark of life coming through in what she's speaking. And then I went home and I very promptly got sick. So many cultures talk about how grief goes to our lungs. My lungs were already a vulnerable place for me, and I was already somebody well acquainted with grief. But that grief really sunk deep into my chest, and first became bronchitis and then became pneumonia. And then on New Year's Eve, that woman I had met at the dinner party called me out of the blue. And we talked for a while, and then we hung up. And then she called right back and she said, I heard the way you were breathing, and there's a plant who would like to help you. Her name is Alicampe, and she has a deep resinous root and a bright yellow flower, and she helps to pull up whatever you're holding on to deep in your lungs so you can release it. And so I went, and immediately, like the natural food store in town was open for another couple hours, and they happened to have some Alicampe tincture. And so I went and took the first few drops of it. And while the relief in my breathing came fairly quickly, before that, something else happened. And that something else that happened was I had carried the story all of my life, coming that my body was just broken, that there was nothing I could do about it. I just had bad genes. I was never going to belong in a body. And as soon as I tasted the herb, I felt that story begin to unravel. And over the months that followed, as I began to reclaim my breath, I began to feel called to moving my body for the first time in my life. I exercised growing up, had always been that thing that I wasn't very good at, that people yelled at me and ridiculed me about. But then when I felt that breath coming in, and I felt my life and awareness beginning to come into my body, I found that my body wanted to move. And I found that even though I was never going to be a runner, I was never going to be a ball player, that there was actually a solidity to my body that wanted to be expressed and wanted to be supported. And so very quickly I found that lifting weights, there was a sleeping strength in my body that began to awaken. And also the downward pressure of the gravity. And in Irish, our word for gravity is Dawan Tarrant, pull of the world. So feeling the pull of the world on the weights, on the iron, also made me feel the pull of the world on me and sink me more deeply into presence. And so it became a meditation that brought me more into myself. And very quickly, the shape and the experience of my body began to change. And my whole way of being began to change. And instead of being someone who wanted to live purely in the world of thought, I began to come more into the world of embodiment, the world of sensation. And ultimately, if we want to anchor anything in this world, we need to come into our own material reality, our own bodies, and the ways that our bodies are responding to the body of the world. And so, yeah, I'd spent most of my life in the state that my late friend and great influence, Stephen Buhner, spoke of. He called it dissociated mentation, when we just live solely in the brain. And over the years that followed, I came down first into the heart, and now continuing to come more and more fully into my body. And physical training has been an important part of that. And then absolutely, as you said, it also provides a clear sense of, well, how do we make change in the world? If we can learn how to make change in our own bodies, discover the ways that focus, attention, and presence and discipline come together to change our own form, then we can understand the ways in which changing our focus and attention and bringing discipline to what exists outside us can also bring the same kind of.
Wow. So let me see if I get this straight. You prayed for basically a breakdown, more or less.
Yeah.
And you got sick. So basically, would you say then that your activism left you burnt out and disconnected from the very earth that you sought to defend? And if so, what would you say then healed that disconnect specifically?
Yeah, I would absolutely say that it did, or at least the way that I approached it did. And there are people who I know who are still devoted to a more activist path, who are very much in their bodies and very much connected with the earth. But for me, I needed to come into connection with my own body as something other than just a vehicle for my mind, and something other than just an obstacle to put in the way of what other people were trying to do in order to show up more fully in the world. And I had a really hard time finding human models for how to do that in a way that felt like it had integrity. But in the plant world, I found, the bodies of the plants aren't very different from our own. They have the same kinds of neural networks that we do. They have the same kinds of circulatory systems that we do. They have the same kind of skin that we do. They breathe in the same way that we do, except in reverse. So they know a whole lot about being in bodies in this world. And what they know about being in bodies in this world hasn't been shaped by all the stories of colonization and civilization. And it connects with much older parts of us. And when we go all the way back, all of our ancestors first learned about being in bodies in this world, for the plants and the animals and the stones and the water around them. And those same teachers are still available to us, even in the places where the direct teachings of ancestors are harder to come by.
Most definitely. And that is the reason why we have like DMT receptors in our brains. We have the receptors for psilocybin, cannabinoid receptors as well, because the plants are basically part of us. And if we weren't part of them and them part of us, we wouldn't even have those receptors in our brains, right? For them to
Absolutely.
give us
Yeah.
to give us healing, to help with visions, and basically clean out our brains, because our brains are like, I guess you can say proverbially like a rubbish heap, because it collects pretty much everything. And then the plants, the medicine comes in and has to do its cleaning and rearrange those thoughts and beliefs so that the front is stacked with things more positive, because in this present world we tend to have a lot more stuff negative stacked to the front, right?
Right.
And it drains you, you know?
Yeah. And, these molecules are far older than us. They evolved in the history of the world right at the same time the world first began to breathe. It was the first bacteria that developed the molecules that become our neurotransmitters. And then those became plants and became animals and became fungi and just spread out around the world. And yeah, my friend Stephen would talk about the ways in which, well, part of the function these served for other organisms and for other ecosystems was to weave consciousness together and to help them open up to more creative information and find creative solutions to the changes and challenges that were happening ecologically in their worlds. And like we think that we're we as a species, or at least as a culture, are very proud of having these brains contained in our cranium. A tree has the same sort of structure in its root structure and its rhizomatic structure, except that is planted in the soil. It can grow wider and wider. It's not contained in the same way that ours is. So we get to have these minds that are contained. And that's kind of an interesting thing, because we get to have a little bit more of an individual experience than other forms of life do. And that ultimately serves all of life, because we're kind of part of the world feeling itself. But yeah, for traditional people anywhere in the world, the understanding was we have that individual experience, so we can go back to our community and share that perspective and weave perspective together. And so in our community can reweave its connection with the land and with the rest of life. And throughout history, whenever humans began to stray a little bit away from understanding our relationship with things, these molecules began to come up for us again and again. So like we look back at the Neolithic, when people started large-scale agriculture with livestock, all of a sudden, well, they're creating all these fields. And what comes up in those fields but psilocybin-containing mushrooms? And so the people go out to those mushrooms and they begin engaging them, and the mushrooms are like, don't forget where you came from. Yeah, you're doing some cool things, but you have to remember what this is all for. And then we have that again, like in ancient Greece, they build the city-states and they begin putting walls around their cities and developing all this culture. And then at Eleusis, the priestesses figure out, okay, if we put together psilocybin and this ergot fungus that grows on the rye, we have this visionary experience. And then people went into those initiations, and it was, you have to remember that life and death and rebirth are all part of a cycle. And if you want to be part of making those decisions for other beings, you have to understand your connection with everything. And then we fast forward. So like the 1940s, we create the first nuclear bomb, and the world gets a little bit more concerned. And so simultaneously, psilocybin starts getting the attention of people in the global north. And Albert Hoffman in Switzerland synthesizes LSD. And that's sort of the world reaching to us and saying, hey, now that you have capacity to make this level of change, you have to remember where you came from and what the implications of that change are. So here we are again. And here we're at this really tricky moment, because prior to now, anytime we engage these molecules, part of what they did was weave us back into connection with the rest of life, because that was where we would naturally go. But now that we've created these large artificial systems, the internet itself, and global markets and its emergence into artificial intelligence, there's this other pole we can be pulled toward that actually takes us further out of ourselves and further out of relation. So we have to be very, very careful about our intention, our attention. And when we go to these molecules, like what our ancestors would have done is said, I'm coming I want to listen to the land. I want to listen to the land in order to come back with a vision for my people. And if you do that, you can still find that same insight. But if you go in saying, um, I want more for myself, or I want to succeed in these new global systems, well, you're going to be pulled in that direction. You're going to be pulled um, pretty much further off course. So it's a time of a lot of profound choice for us.
Definitely, definitely. We are definitely at a crossroads as a civilization, as a species, as an organism, I would say, on this planet. So, how did your Irish heritage and ancestral folklore begin whispering their way back into your life?
Well, it's interesting because they were, in some ways, always there around the edges for me since very early childhood. My great uncle was the last member of the family to speak Irish fluently. Well, he and his wife. And when I was very young, my grandfather took me to see him, and the first time I ever heard music being played, it was him playing the Buska Ciol, the concertina, in his driveway, playing the old music. That just immediately grabbed my imagination. I was about 2 years old at that point. I can still remember being in the driveway. And then as I got a little bit older, I began to come across some of the tales about the other world and about the Tuatha, the tribe who were the ones who had come down from the north, where they had gone to learn the mysteries and had brought their mysteries into the world. And then when civilization became too brutal for them, they went into the ancient burial mounds in the deep waters and took their mysteries with them. And from a very early age, I thought, oh, I remember those people. And I kind of wish they would come and take me with them. And so that played an important role in things for me. And even in my direct experience, like I'd be reading these stories, and then I'd be out in the swamp behind my parents' house. And when I get a certain way into the woody swamp, the rest of the world would begin to dissolve, and there would sort of be a little bit of a shimmering at the edge of my field of perception. I'd recognize I'd crossed into something else. And I knew that was somehow connected with those stories and with that music. I didn't really understand entirely how. And then, when I got to be a teenager and a young adult, and I was really just focused on political change, I sort of put a lot of those things behind me. They still appealed to me and called to me in certain ways, and especially the Irish revolutionary tradition called to me a lot during those times. But I sort of left behind a lot of that more spiritual dimension. And it wasn't until a little while after the plants had begun to speak to me that I began to recognize that actually my ancestors had some of these ways of knowing too, and began feeling into them. And I would start having these little bits of vision, and then I'd research things and find that, oh, that actually connected with something in the old stories. And then finally, when I had the chance to go to Ireland for the first time, I went there with a deep prayer to understand what did it mean to be a man with compassion and integrity for my ancestors, because I knew there was something that had been lost about that. And I asked the land to show me. It was another one of those I made the prayer right before I went. I made the prayer again on the very first day I was there. And then I sort of forgot about it and began engaging everything that was around me. And then 4 days later, I was taken to this 1,100-year-old oak tree, and finding myself beneath the oak, I leaned back into the oak, and it was a huge tree. It's like there was an indentation in the trunk that was as wide as my shoulders. Back, be entirely held in it, feel its strength and solidity. And part of what I felt was its deep rootedness and how much it had witnessed, and how it had given shelter to so many over time. But then I began to feel something else. I felt the way that when I leaned back, it was holding me. And the very first instinct I had was to say, this is so maternal. And then a voice that wasn't my own said, no, that's not what I'm showing you. And I realized it was showing me the nourishing masculine, the way in which the masculine, when it stands in its strength and its solidity, but with a gentleness, can provide that support for those who need it to lean back into. And still, when I need to call on that capacity, I call up in my body the memory of being held by that oak. And then I call up, and that shows me something about how to do that for someone else. But it was just a few years after that I finally got around to reading some of the words that Robert Bly had written and that Wendell Berry had written about what happened to the family after the Industrial Revolution. And Robert Bly said, the loneliest person in the world is the father after the Industrial Revolution. Now, I know a few mothers who would make a pretty strong and convincing claim that the mothers are just as lonely, if not more so. I don't think it's a competition. I think it's a different loneliness. But what he was getting at was that before the men got pulled away, they were part of the household. And being part of that household, they were part of the nurturing and the nourishing. But when men got taken out of the household and out of the family life, men forgot how to be nurturing and nourishing. And then when men began to try to remember that again, we started looking towards feminine nurturing and feminine nourishment because those were the only forms that were left. But Bly would look to old stories to find the examples of, no, actually there's a masculine form of this that's distinct and necessary. And the oak was showing me that very same.
Very, very interesting. Very interesting. So, what role did exile, personal or ancestral, play in your calling to reconnect with the land?
That's a wonderful question. And in so many ways, I feel like I was kind of born into exile. I mean, in the sense that my great grandfather and great grandmother came over here, came over to the United States, um, in a time of great suffering for the Irish people. And in fact, my great grandfather came over with a price on his head because he had been a captain in the Irish Republican Brotherhood, trying to keep alive the language and the culture and trying to begin to organize to take the country back on behalf of the people. And when he came to Massachusetts, he moved to the highest hill in the city, so he could always look out and see if there was a boat with a British flag in the harbor in case somebody had come to get him. But ultimately, the threat he ended up facing was from the Ku Klux Klan, who were trying to drive the Irish out of the city and came and burned a cross in his neighborhood. And that day was the last day that anybody except my great grandparents and my great uncle spoke Irish in the family, because the children were all taught to not be heard speaking the language. Quickly they forgot it, except the oldest, who was too old to forget it. And so, like some of that legacy of that ancestral legacy of exile and that feeling of loss was there. And it was also, I grew up knowing my grandfather and my great uncle, so I knew the people who had experienced that loss. There was a sense in which I connected that with the ways that I also felt like I was born into a world in a culture that didn't make any sense to me, that just felt brutal in ways that had no justification or explanation, that everybody else seemed to be going along with. And so that combination of feeling kind of born in the wrong place in the wrong time and reaching back for, okay, well, where in my lineage was there the experience of something different, began to lead to that weaving back with that Irish lineage. And when I got to be on the land there for the first time, I understood things about being myself in the world I'd never understood before. And it was also interesting that even before that, you know, Native friends here had told me about their own experiences of what happened when their language and their culture were taken away. And I actually learned first from Native people in Canada about about what had happened to my own ancestors, and that what was applied to them had first been tested out on the Irish. And when that allowed for the subjugation of people, then they exported that model elsewhere. And so, yeah, it all came full circle. And in a sense, what I was witnessing in Oaxaca was the same thing that my own ancestors had been through not very long ago in history. Um, and that I was called to push back against it and resist it was in some ways kind of the inheritance of their dignity and their struggle.
Yeah, definitely. The Irish were like the first set of people that everything was tested out on, and then it went to the Caribbean. And even like my island, Barbados, was instrumental in that entire time because there's something called the Barbados Slave Code, which was tested on the people in Barbados, and then it was exported to the Americas. So the
Right.
British started it on the Irish, perfected it in Barbados, my island, my country, and then exported it to the world. So, there's been a lot of injustice, I guess you can say, done to people on the entire planet,
Absolutely.
and there's a lot of ancient history, languages, ways of being, and connection to the earth that has been lost through all that injustice.
Yeah.
So you've said healing begins when we stop trying to fix nature and start listening to her. Can you unpack what listening to nature truly means?
It actually is, it's so simple that we miss it. Like I think about how Terence McKenna said the world is alive and always speaking to us, and this is not a metaphor. And then when people hear that, they rush around trying to figure out what the metaphor is. But it's right there in what he's saying. This is not a metaphor.
Even if it's not a
And
metaphor.
yeah, and that yeah, it's like in the world is alive and always speaking to us. Our nervous systems evolved in a world rich in information where our elders and our kin, the plants and the animals and the stones and the water, were communicating information to us. And we evolved to have a neurological and an endocrine sensitivity to all of those signals. And as soon as we began to come back into our bodies, but especially back into our hearts, we began to experience that capacity to have the world speak to us again. And so, um, yeah, at the heart of my practice is working with the heart, which I learned from Stephen Buhner and Julia McIntyre. It really begins with a very simple process of feeling your heartbeat and bringing gratitude to your heartbeat and learning to be with that attention for a longer and longer time. And then from that place, walking out, experiencing what else impacts you. And so after a time of doing that by yourself, then you go and do that sitting with a tree. And you begin to notice all of the emotions, sensations that arise for you. And sure, they're filtered through your own experience. And so they come to you in your own particular language through the library of symbols that your mind has held. but they are something coming directly from outside you. And when we allow ourselves to be in that kind of presence and that kind of attention, we start to learn something else. Just like how the oak, in holding me in that way, showed me a way of standing in the world and a way of holding others that both a part of me had always wanted to receive, but also a part of me knew that it was essential for me to be able to give. And even where exactly how to do that had been lost from many generations of humans, at least in the culture that I was surrounded by, the tree was still there to show that directly. And so it really is going right to these beings. And it's funny, the anthropologists want, and the historian, and even popular culture wants to tell us the story that we discovered everything once upon a time through trial and error. And like, there's that meme that goes around about here's to the people who tasted all the mushrooms until they found out which ones were poisonous. No, that's not actually what happened. We wouldn't have survived as a species if that had been the case. And one of my favorite examples of this is the herb yarrow, which will stop really profuse bleeding. And so it's like, yeah, our ancestors, if they got galled by a saber-toothed tiger, had to would have reached for yarrow in order to stop the bleeding and would have survived to tell the tale. Do you really think somebody got clawed by a saber-toothed tiger and was just sort of lying there in the field saying, well, maybe I'll try some mint, maybe I'll try some rose, etc., until finally, just before they died, they tried some yarrow? Not very likely. Really, they went to the plant that spoke to them, and they listened to what the plant was guiding them toward, and then they passed that on to others. And our bodies are biologically the same as those of our ancestors and evolved to respond to the world in the same ways. And sure, we don't have the same training in it that our ancestors would have had, but we can reclaim it and actually get pretty good at it.
So basically, according to what you're saying just now, our ancestors were way more in tune with not only their body, but with the plants, that the connection was so profound that when a situation arose, I should say, the plant spoke to them in a time of need. Am I hearing correctly? Is that what you're trying to say?
Absolutely. Yeah. And for a
Wow.
long time, the way that I thought about it was about the plants just being generous, which they are. But then I began to realize that's kind of a human-centered view of things. My friend Julie McIntyre says, we have to remember it's their experience too. And I began thinking about this when I was walking in the forest here and praying for healing. And I realized that absolutely my prayer for healing was part of what made me open to hearing what the world was saying. But really, at the same time, the forest was experiencing, okay, here's this new organism who's coming in. And his breath and his sweat and the rhythm of his heart and the rhythm of his footsteps and his presence are coming into our world and changing things. And he seems to be sort of paying attention, but he's also bringing something that's out of balance. And so let's try to have the ones who can bring him into balance get his attention. So the next time he comes here, he'll be bringing something better and can be a better part of this community.
Okay. So in your writings, you describe plants not only as medicine, but as teachers. What are some of the most profound teachings you've received from them?
Well, I spoke of the teaching from the oak. Another one that comes to mind is a lichen called usnea. which is commonly called old man's beard because it has all these green tendrils like long hairs. Although I call it green man's beard very often. And yeah, my very first time engaging Usnia, I was walking in the forest after going through a heartbreak, and I just had this instinct to start following wherever the Usnia had fallen on the trail. And so I kept following there, and following there, until I was deeper in the forest. I didn't quite know where I was. I just stood still, started paying attention. And when I started paying attention, it was like I could feel each of those tendrils working its way into a crack in my heart. And like all those broken places were the places medicine was. And then Usnia began to speak to me about power, about how all my life I had been afraid of the ways that I saw humans holding and embodying power. And so I had tried to sabotage myself so I wouldn't be powerful. But in doing that, I was giving over control to the very people who I saw creating harm in the world, because I was letting them be the ones who were in power. And that I needed to actually start showing up and claiming my place. And that meant allowing the medicine to come into the broken places. So the woundedness could be replaced by the wholeness that wanted. And that really, really began to shift things very profoundly. And then a year later, I went out into the mountains in New Hampshire with a group of people, and then we all went separately to fast in solitude for 4 days. And the idea was that an animal would come to us as a teacher. But ultimately, on the third day, I was very disappointed that no animal had come to me. But I began looking at the edge of the little stone circle that was the limit of my movement, as a part of the process of standing still. That was sitting still in one place as well. And I saw that the rain the night before had brought down usnia, and the usnia was kind of glowing. And I started paying attention to that glow that's present. And then I began to feel it working its way inside me again. And the first thing it said to me was, the wound is where the healing comes. And it talked with me about, and I later learned that it said the same thing to other people who listen deeply, about how it's the medicine for the trees. And that we go to it because it produces antibacterial and antifungal compounds that help us deal with infection. And it's very glad to do that for us, but ultimately it's doing that for the trees that it coexists with, who were here long before us. And that, but that the medicine is only produced because the tree has the wound. And so you have to go to that wounded place to find the lichen that's bringing the medicine. And then it started showing me, because this was like, I was still had one foot very firmly in the activist world and was really resisting the idea of going and working more with healing work. They began to show me, well, everybody who is in pain is carrying somewhere in them the traces of the violence of this culture. And if we want to change that, the medicine will come from going to those wounded places and asking about what wants to come in to bring that healing. And then going toward the plants that show up and letting them teach that healing. So Usnia was the teacher of that for me. And that allowed me to step the rest of the way out of the framework I had been in.
Very, very interesting. Lusnia was I would guess, one of the biggest game changers for you then, according to that story, because
Absolutely.
it sounds like a huge transformation that you went through.
Yeah.
So you speak about plants. You speak about plants as bridges to ancestral memory. How do you see that connection working in a modern industrialized mind?
Well, in some ways, it's the only way we can reach some of what the ancestors have, because so much of it was taken from us. And Asada Shakur, who just joined the ancestors, talked about the ways in which our education system isn't going to give us what we need for our liberation. And so, yeah, if we want to find that, sure, we can go far enough into the recesses of the libraries and find hints. But a lot of it's going to lie out further in the living world. And so the plants are the ones who taught our ancestors how to be in the world. And so if we want to learn to be in the world, well, our ancestors will speak to us. Going to their teachers can be a direct route. And it's also, in some ways, like their teachers are speaking to them as they were in the world where they were. When we go to those same teachers, they speak to us as we are in the world where we are. And so exactly what we get from them will be a little bit different, but it will be coming from a being of the same character and showing us similar important things about how to be in the world. And ultimately, I also think the single most important thing is just coming back into connection with the rest of life. And that's what our culture militates against most strongly. And so anytime we go to begin to listen to those voices that are the ones that know the things our culture doesn't want us to know, we begin to see new possibilities. And the ones that we're told don't even have voices to begin with often have the voices that are most profound with them. That's true both among the humans whose voice has been silenced and pushed to the edges. The most important truths will come there. But it's especially true when we look at all the beings who our culture doesn't want us to think have their intelligence, and all the beings who our culture doesn't want us to think and speak to us. And the plants are very strong among those beings who have a profound amount to teach. And what they teach comes entirely from outside the frameworks that have been imposed on us.
Absolutely. And that is the reason why they've suppressed all plant medicines for many, 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 many years. Because I think that if plant medicines were readily available to every human on earth, and we had the equivalent of like mystery schools that had those same sort of like initiations or rites of passage, or just teachings from the indigenous people, I think our world would be a hugely different place today. But the powers that shouldn't be, they don't want people to wake up. And that is the reason why, there's this war on quotation marks drugs, because they're the drug pushers, and they push the
Right.
synthetics that shouldn't be consumed because it makes a profit, and then they suppress the natural plants, because all these medicines are plants, and once taken in the right settings, with reverence and respect, it's shown that people have changed in their life, mentally, physically, spiritually. But so what happens when someone begins to treat plants as living allies rather than substances?
Then our whole sense of who we are and who they are and what the world is begins to change. So, and our experience of ourselves will change coming into contact with plants no matter what. But if we're treating them just as objects, the depth of change that's available to us will be limited. Excuse me. In part because we'll be closing off some of the subtlest and most important levels of what they're showing us. But in part but also because the deepest thing that they're showing us is relation. And relation is exactly what the world has tried to take away from us. And so we've been trained to treat people as objects. We've even been trained to treat ourselves as objects. And when we go to this other being, who we've been told has no mind and no sense and no voice at all, and begin actually listening and paying attention, then that ability to relate and that sense of, oh, maybe I'm part of something more, and maybe there is a different reality, begins to show up. And yes, the physical and psychological healing become deeper, but more and more I began to think of like the physical and psychological healing as kind of positive side effects. And that actually the whole point of the medicine is the connection. And then through the connection, we end up having this better.
Okay, so how can herbal medicine restore balance between physical and emotional pain, especially in a culture that medicates symptoms but avoids root causes?
By inviting us to pay attention. And ultimately, physical pain and emotional pain aren't separate. Which interestingly, like even the doctors are beginning to come around to recognizing, oh, wait a second, all these people experiencing chronic pain have these elements of trauma. And there are also these biological things going on, and they're intersecting with each other. And which one causes the other? Well, they seem to influence each other. So like their science itself is beginning to come to.
Hello, guys. So we're back again. We had another outage from Sean, and it appears that the internet gods just don't like this topic that we're going to get into. So we're going to see if third time is lucky. So, Sean, how can herbal medicine restore balance between physical and emotional pain, especially in a culture that medicates symptoms but avoids root causes?
Well, part of the beginning place is that to our bodies, there actually is no difference between physical and emotional pain. Pain is simply a signal that something's out of balance and requires our attention. It's only in the past 500 years of the story of the mind and body being separate that we've treated them as separate. And interestingly, medical science is sort of slowly coming around to this realization, recognizing that they can't tell in people who are experiencing chronic pain where the physical and begins and the emotional ends and vice versa. Clearly both are happening, but they can't be differentiated. They feed into each other. And so generally, our approach to pain culturally has been to try to push it away. We try to push away all the difficult things ultimately. And because in engaging with plant medicine, especially when we're doing it in a conscious way of actually approaching the plant and asking this other being for help and for teaching, we're moving in the opposite direction. And so we're able to come into a place where our mental and emotional and physical senses begin to come back together. And especially if we pay attention to the changes in sensation that the medicine brings us, then that begins to show us another way of showing up and a way of being with things differently. And it won't always make the pain resolve, but it will change our relationship.
You know, I find that like today, medicine, Western medicine is really, really good for things like surgeries and stuff. But in terms of like actually like treating the body, I think it's not really very good. And I remember reading an article, this was like 8 years ago, and it was very interesting. And it said that it appears that most people that when they get cancer, they've had a traumatic experience between 6 months to 18 months prior, like super traumatic, whether it was a loss of a family member, something to do stressful with job, but the body had a traumatic event. And that basically created the cancer, the toxicity in the body, because basically when someone has cancer, the cells are acidic and toxic, And it was very interesting that, they are just looking at the cancer itself and not really what would be the root cause of the cancer, And this article was insinuating that it basically came down to stress. And I found that really interesting, that we know that stress is a big killer, but stress would actually appear in the body as cancer. And then now there are people like Dr. Sebi, who, in my opinion, I think was silenced, found cures to cancer and HIV and stuff, all from plants. So, there seems to be a real disharmony today between us, the plants, and illness,
Well, thought and emotion are biological events. It's like we are culturally trained to think of them as happening somewhere out there, but we're experiencing them through our bodies. And so they have traces on our bodies, and they have chemical signatures, and the chemical events change what's happening physically. And we know as that trauma changes not only the structures of brains, but also the reactivity of immune cells, because our whole immune response is supposed to be about understanding what's threatening us and protecting us. But if our sense of safety is deeply compromised and deeply transformed, of course our immune responses can be transformed. And cancer is ultimately a disease of immune imbalance. Now, that's not to say that conventional cancer treatments aren't also important. Surgery and radiation and chemotherapy for some people can stop the process in a way that then gives them the opportunity to come into the possibility of deeper healing. And sometimes without those things, the process would be moving too fast, and the cancer would kill them before they had the opportunity to really come to that resolution. And of course, the other thing we have to remember is we are all going to die. Life, death, and rebirth are part of our cycle. And so healing isn't about preventing death. Healing is about showing up in wholeness and integrity to the greatest degree possible. But the longer time we have, and the more opportunities we have to show up, the closer we can get. And so absolutely extending life through the technologies that can put it at bay can be a useful thing in helping to bring the larger question to resolution. But if the larger question isn't brought to resolution, the imbalance is just going to show up somewhere else in a different way a little bit down the line.
So therefore root causes are what should be researched and treated, and not just the symptom, which is basically what I think you're saying.
Right. Well, I do think we need to do both to a degree, because, taking care of the symptoms matters, both in terms of the degree to which the person's able to be aware and show up and be present, but also in terms of giving more time for that process of addressing the root causes, because otherwise the symptoms might advance too quickly. But treating the symptoms by itself is never going to bring resolution.
Okay. So you write about the language of the land. How can someone begin learning that language today, even in a city?
Well, it begins by bringing that awareness to the heart, being with your heartbeat and with gratitude for your heartbeat and practicing coming into that state. And then going to the places where things that aren't human are finding their expression. And everywhere that wildness exists. And so, yeah, you don't have to be in the wilderness. In the city, you can find where are the plants cracking through the concrete. What's happening in the basements of abandoned buildings? What's happening in vacant lots? What's happening with a spider weaving its web in the corner of your room? All of these are places where, other than human life, is showing up to be present with us. There's no environment that we've created yet that isolates us fully from the rest of life. And so wherever we are, bring that quality of attention can begin to bring us back into communication.
Okay, very interesting. So guys, we can take a very short break here to say, if you're feeling the pull of this conversation, pause for a second. Hit like, subscribe, and share this episode with someone who's been searching for a deeper kind of healing, one that goes beyond biohacks and quick fixes. Because what Seán shares here could help someone remember the sacred relationship they've forgotten with their own body and the living earth. And while you're here, please don't forget to follow us on Instagram at Adriano_246 or the Conscious Man 7 podcast and get some daily content from me and keep in contact with me. All right, so let's go deeper. So Seán, in Courting the Wild Queen, you wrote about the ancient Irish myth of the king who must marry the land. What does that myth teach us about masculinity today?
Well, that ultimately, true sovereignty is always born from connection. We, in our modern sense, like to think that we can be independent, and that if we just choose what we think we want for ourselves, that's an act of sovereignty. But in reality, we've always understood ourselves in relation with what's alive in the world. And so in ancient Irish culture, there was the understanding that the one who united the will of the people was the one who had given himself fully to the land and to the people, and been chosen in turn by them. And so we have this Irish word ri that gets translated into English as king. And, even the English had this concept themselves long, long ago. But our modern understanding of the English word king doesn't really capture its reality. Because it wasn't the person who made the decisions. The people made the decisions together at their assembly. And their assembly was held at the beginning of the dark of the year at Samhain, when the voices of the ancestors could be heard. So all the generations would be making the decision together. And it wasn't even the king who rendered judgment and enforced the law, or made the law. The law was a song that was passed from generation to generation with subtle changes that came. And the song involved not only the rules and guidance for how people should live, but the history and the genealogy and the stories of the land. And the judges were druids. They were special priests who had devoted themselves particularly to knowing that song and knowing the rhythm of that song and being in calm and cool judgment. The ri served two functions. One was when the people were gathered at the assembly, the ri was the one who would hold their attention together and hold their intention together so that all of their decisions and discussions would happen in a sacred way. in a time of battle, the Ree would join everybody, men and women alike, everybody who had the ability, when the people were threatened or where the land was threatened, to rise up in defense of the people in the land. So every adult person would come together, but the Ree would be among them and would be the living force, the living example that unified their will and reminded them of what they needed to do. And would be chosen by the land, which would be known through signs that people would see. It would be chosen by the people as they looked at those signs, and would have responsibility to be fair, responsibility to be just, responsibility to be devoted, and a responsibility to create and embody and seek beauty, because beauty would remind the people of what it was that united them. And so, in our own lives in this time, we can go back to that concept and say, who I am is about who and what I'm in service to, who and what I'm in devotion to, rather than what I want for myself. And that when I recognize and honor what I'm in devotion to and follow those intuitions, those voices, those leadings, and that ethos, that I'm going to live in a way that, first of all, creates a better life, but secondly, then inspires others to begin to come into that same flow of unity. And so, while we live in a very differently structured culture and a really very differently structured society, when we reach in that direction, we can find a good way forward. And ultimately, one of my favorite writers, the late Irish philosopher John Moriarty, spoke of a king on his way to having experienced the test of being in the presence of the spirit of the land and waking up and being told, you have become the dream of the people. Walk forward on the road toward your destiny. And ultimately, we have that same invitation. But we have to choose who and what is going to dream us. If we let ourselves be the dream of our ancestors and the dream of our descendants and the dream of the land, we're going to allow ourselves to be shaped in a particular way. If we let ourselves be the dream of this culture around us, we're just going to keep repeating the same mistakes.
Very, very true. So, do you think modern men have lost their sacred relationship between strength and service to the earth?
Absolutely. Our strength exists for the purpose of service, not as an end in itself.
I find, today,
Although...
Yeah, sorry.
That's okay. I say, although, as you and I have both learned, when we bring the right quality of attention to it, cultivating strength brings us back into understanding that service.
I was just about to say that I find that when, as men, we pay attention to our physical body, our strength, it does something to our mindset. And I mean, to be fair, this is applicable to women too, but I find that men and women have different roles in the whole fabric of the universe, right? And like you said, men are there for service. This is why our bodies are able to lift heavy loads, push heavy loads, take a lot of manual labor, right? Because, strength is a key component of masculinity and being a male. And I find that today we have a lot of men that are just not in shape. They're forgetting their purpose. And I think that there is a connection to loss of basically connection to the land, because, if you were very in tune with the land, by default, I think you would be quite strong because you're doing a lot of physical labor. Because, I remember I had a neighbor and he was like 85 or 86, something like that. And he was still working the land, like extremely strong. And then I think like he decided that he was going to, give up and let his grandson do the work. And literally within like 2-3 years, he was dead, and he just stopped going into the land. And he used to work the land barefoot as well, like walking in Barbados on the hot ground barefoot. Like you can't get no more grounded than that, But he was strong and fit as a fiddle. And now when I go back to Barbados, I went back to Barbados this year, and the land is not even worked anymore. Grandson doesn't do anything, and it's just overgrown. But it just goes to show you that when there's a strong connection with the land, there's physical strength, because he was in his late 80s and he was strong as hell, So it's quite sad that we've become just internet sleuths now, instead of having some sort of like kitchen garden or working the land, or just grounding in general, because strength is very hugely important, because it helps with drive, ambition, raises testosterone, and you get you're more focused, you can work harder, more energy, all these kind of things. So how can myth become a healing force in the times when men no longer believe in stories but live them unconsciously?
Well, whatever we're living unconsciously plays out in ways we don't intend.
True.
And whatever we're living unconsciously, we're living without intention. I was listening to talk by a great myth worker, Michael Mead, and he talked about the fact that the word story is related to the word storehouse, because stories are places where things are stored. And so that got me thinking about, well, what we need to do is go into like the root cellars of the stories and find where are the things that are stored there that we didn't know about, that were hidden there in some ways by our ancestors, waiting for our attention right now. And it's so interesting because those exist in the stories. They also exist in the physical world. I'm struck by the ways in which, like, archaeologists began finding all these artifacts that tell us about ways people lived long ago, right at exactly the moments when we most need that information. And so it's striking that, like, as glaciers are melting and as rivers and lakes are drying up and all these events are happening, suddenly things that were hidden from us become evident. And then when we begin to examine them, it's like, oh, okay, here are the ancestors saying there's a different way of doing this. But there's an archaeology of stories we can engage with as well. And I noticed that very often the same stories and the same themes will start showing up at the moment that archaeology and biology are beginning to discover things that through their own lenses that we've ignored. And so engaging those stories consciously and actually going into them, we have to go into them more deeply. We can't just say, we can't do it purely intellectually. We can't just try to figure out, oh, is this a symbol of that? We have to actually go into feeling the story, feeling what it would be to walk within the landscape that story creates. And then in ourselves, we can feel something that we weren't able to connect with because we didn't have another way in. And because those stories provide us an entry point to another time and place and way of being, there are ways in which the ancestors and the intelligence of the world can smuggle things to us.
It is almost like if it's all connected. Like you said, where, archaeology would suddenly become available because of the changes on the earth. And then stories and myths would start to like make sense and connect. So it's really interesting what you just shared just now. So how can rites of passage rooted in nature help heal men from the fragmentation of modern life?
Well, I tend to find the more we allow them to be actually shaped by the living world, and the less we depend on other humans to shape them, unless they're rites of passage that are coming from an intact line of transmission from a traditional culture. I actually find that turning to those wild teachers to be the initiators is the best direction to move in. And we also have to go in not seeking a particular result, but being ready to be transformed. If you don't want to be transformed, why go toward a transformative experience? We have to go in without expectation, and we have to look to something outside ourselves and bigger than ourselves to remake us. So a rite of passage is really about being broken and reassembled. And we have to trust what it is that's going to be reassembling us. And the most trustworthy things are the rest of the living world. And this is becoming especially important when I look at, for such a long time, I thought if only we could get over the transformational and initiatory medicines being outlawed, if only they could become legal, then we would have so much more of a better direction. But what I didn't anticipate was the ways in which the same powers that made them illegal, once they began to talk about legalizing them, would want to control the context in which people were engaging them and shape the set and setting that then determine the outcome. And so I'm deeply trustful. I deeply trust a medicine like psilocybin or peyote or San Pedro. And I do trust the traditional ways of working with those. Like I trust the way the Native American church works with peyote, for example, because that's come from a long-term relationship, and that was taught first by the plant. But I'm I'm more than a little bit distrustful of the people who become shamans at a weekend workshop and then go forward to lead people in in an initiation that they might not have fully entered into themselves, or in the idea of going to a retreat center and having this happen in a really structured way, or even more so going to a clinic and having this happen in a really structured way. And all this talk about integration and coaching people towards integration. Well, actually, what we're needing is the initial disintegration. We need the radical transformation. And then we need to be put back together by something that's not of this culture if we want to really engage, if we want to really receive the initiation.
Yeah, it's true. And you find that like now psychedelics have become very commercialized. It's pretty much like, for business, is shaman for hire in South America and stuff. And one of the things that I have done is that I have, interviewed my shaman on here so that when people are searching through my content, they have good people that I trust, that I've sat with the medicine with, I know personally. And, they could, contact them and arrange, because it's very true what you're saying there. No, there are a lot of people that are saying they're shaman, but they're not real shaman. And you need someone that's experienced and skilled to guide you through the experience, because, like my ayahuasca shaman said, like the same way you have like a city center, and if you go to a new city, you need like a tour guide. Well, the spiritual world is like the same city center, but you need a tour guide in the spiritual realm to help you navigate and find your way, because it is easy to get lost. So, it's one of those things that, while it's a lot of good, because, it is an opportunity to make a buck, there will always be bad actors out there that be just trying to profit only and not really be trying to help or to heal or to have change, So, what
Absolutely.
does courting the wild mean to you in an age of concrete and convenience?
It means turning our back on that, turning our back on the convenient, turning our back on the received assumptions, and becoming willing to be curious about everything and willing to be transformed, and looking to what's at that shimmering edge of our vision, what is just outside what we've been allowed to see, and approaching that with love and openness and reverence, and allowing ourselves to be received and met.
Yes, definitely. So you've said weightlifting grounds you spiritually. How does physical strength training deepen your relationship to spirit?
It's funny. We, like, in most of our culture, including in most people trying to live a more spiritual life, we have this idea of body and spirit being opposite. And this idea of, oh, you need to raise the vibration and descend. And actually, it's...
Me too.
I find quite the reverse. It's kind of a cosmic joke that, like, the universe is full of beings that don't have bodies and want to get into them. And our culture is full of beings who do have bodies and want to get out of them. And that can lead to either hilarious or tragic results, depending on who shows up in the body that you're trying to abandon, and what agendas are at play. But I find the deeper I come into my body, the more I'm having this experience of spirit. And really, it's like if we think back, it's like every element in our body was something that was forged over millions of years in the furnaces of stars and spread and carried by cosmic winds to come to this earth, be here at this particular moment, come into this particular arrangement. So the everything can have the particular experience that can only have through our senses. And so it's really a dishonoring of spirit to say, no, I don't want this. Not that I don't still fall prey to that temptation sometimes, and those cultural voices sometimes. But when I do come more deeply into my body, I come more into that experience of the world having the opportunity to experience itself. And, the Taoists spoke about this, and in the Taoist medicine and the Taoist martial arts, they say that actually that those deep, subtle levels at which everything is remade are below and within, not up and out. And the same is true in the Irish cosmology. The same is true in so many understandings. And so it's the more we come into the experience, the more we can show up. And the rest of life needs us to be us, being us, just like we need the rest of life to be itself, being itself. And also, the more we embody who we are, the more other people are invited to do the same.
Yes. And, just to piggyback a little bit on what you said earlier, I find that because I'm kind of a bit of a hybrid and I bridge kind of like all three worlds, the world of self-development, consciousness, spirituality, and fitness. So conscious spirituality, I put in the same basket. Fitness, the separate one, and then self-development.
Yeah.
And this is why my show is called The Conscious Man 7, because what I have found or realized is that the majority of people in the spiritual community are really not fit, in my humble opinion. There are some that are very fit, but I'll be honest, most of them don't have the physique that I have, right? Now, I'm a bit of a hybrid, like I said. So like for me, I found that when I went through my refinement period, fitness was a huge part of my recovery. Now, it wasn't the entire recovery, but it was a major component of it. And I have found now that since I have been much more dialed in on my nutrition, I have found that that has helped me to grow spiritually because of the lighter my body feels, the stronger it's become, the more focused I am because I'm eating the right foods and the right amounts. I am not having sort of like excess and having a lot of surplus on my body, so my body fat is lower. So I find that I, by default, vibrate higher. And there is a symbiotic relationship between the two in terms of, because consciousness is basically light. Light is information. It's really the same thing. The stronger your body is, the more light, the more consciousness the body can retain and also attract to come into it. So while people that are fully into spirituality and consciousness have the door open, I think the door can be wider open if you get the body in tip-top shape. So this is why, like, my clients, they get really good results because I focus heavily on mindset, meditation, consciousness, spirituality, and then obviously the diet and nutrition combined with the exercise is a holistic package. So they get transformations physically, mentally, and spiritually because all the things are working together. This is why even the logo for my show is designed the way it is, where in one hand is calisthenics, the guy doing the planche. The next hand, it represents the consciousness spirituality, which is the magic mushrooms, and the illumination of the man having the 7 chakras in his body, and then the 2 twisted serpents with the wings on top. So I think that most people today miss that in reality, the 3 are really one, the mind, body, and spirit. People talk about it, but when you look at them, their bodies just not there. They're lacking, to be honest with you. I'm trying to be kind here to them, but some of them are really, really not fit. And, it's a bit of a blind spot, So I think that once you really get in tune with all 3 parts of you, there's much more growth that takes place because the stool, which has 3 legs, mind, body, spirit, are in complete harmony, which is why I talk about all of those aspects on the show.
Absolutely. I was going to say, and of course, it can also work in the opposite direction. And I think this is something a lot of young men are falling prey to, that if you are only emphasizing the body in a way that's not really paying attention. So if you're emphasizing what you want the body to look like and the specific external results you want your body to have, but you aren't actually paying attention to being alive in that body, you aren't actually listening to that body, and you aren't actually engaging in the spiritual cultivation, you can get just as far out of balance. And I look with great concern at the number of young men who are moving more and more towards steroids and those, I'm going to get this particular physique at any cost, and missing the whole point of
Absolutely.
what
I completely agree. And the sad reality is that, like, one of my mentors calls it the Burger King generation. He says they want to put the food in the microwave, press it for 5 minutes, out it comes, right? And that's the same thing with the increased use of steroids, because,
Yeah.
I mean, the thing is with steroids is that they have adverse effects on the body, especially long term. And diet, nutrition, and then focusing on things like meditation, basically reading books, learning about things in the unseen realm. It really complements the journey, because you're more than just a body, So I completely agree with you. We're the people that just want to focus on things like yoga and meditation are not in the best shape, so they're missing one part of it. And the people that are only focusing on looking good and posting for Instagram, they're also missing another part. And in reality, there needs to be a merging of all three, right? Because in isolation, they're weak. But in my opinion, that is one of the real trinities that exists, because we have many trinities. We have 369. We have Father, Son, and Spirit. And we also have mind, body, and spirit. So the world is made up of a combination of dualities and trinities. And I think it's our job to discern, what are the trinities and dualities that serve us, and not look at things in isolation, because everything is really connected,
Absolutely. And a three always brings the dynamic spiral motion.
Correct.
And that's what brings life.
So do you see a connection between muscular power and energetic balance in herbal or shamanic traditions?
I intuitively feel like there is that connection, but I feel like I've not seen it written about or heard it spoken about very clearly in very many spaces. And like, I suspect that's partly because I think colonization and things being forced into hiding made certain parts of the transmission get lost.
Yeah, that's true. And I think that if we were to have a fusion, I think we would see an absolute transformation in growth, in learning, in healing, because you find that there are people that would do many ayahuasca retreats, but there's no real change that occurs. But if you are doing fitness, I think it will help spark some of the change there, because to get into shape, you have to change your mindset, your belief system, what you eat, and you are what you eat. So then that is still connecting back to the conscious side of you, because then you start to have the internal dialogue where, okay, well, why am I eating Cheetos and Doritos? Okay. So, and those things will actually stunt your spiritual growth as well, right? Because they're energetic, so it gets you to think outside of the box, So how does...
Yeah. And I'm realizing it's a okay. I realize it's actually hinted at in the Irish tradition. So there are these great warriors called the Fina, who are the defenders of the land and of the people. And they had to be skilled. They had to be strong. They had to be agile. They had to be able to recite 100 poems from memory. They had to have wisdom. They had to have judgment. And they had to have knowledge of the forest. And they were brought into existence by a king who, as a young boy, had tasted the salmon of wisdom, who is the oldest being in all the worlds, who dwells in the well in the other world where all our waters have their source, and who had swum into this world. And he had eaten of the flesh of the salmon of wisdom as a boy and come to be filled with wisdom and knowledge. And so as a man, he grew to unite these men and women around him who had perfected all of these skills, and having the balance of all of these skills could be the protectors of the people. And so that's, I think, a coded memory of the ways in which all of these things were connected, and a way in which, if it was told in fantastic ways, first of all, it would sink into a deeper part of people's memories, but secondly, it could continue being told even after the more literal historical memories were outlawed.
Okay. So, in your experience, what's the difference between discipline driven by ego and discipline anchored in reverence?
I think there are many differences, and it's interesting that I actually find that discipline driven by reverence is actually much more sustainable. Because discipline driven by ego, you'll either reach the point where you think, I'm good enough, I'm the best, or you'll reach the point where you think, I'm never going to be good enough. And either way, the discipline will fall away. But if instead what you're doing is rooted in reverence, it's going to be a continued process of refinement. How do I keep showing up more and more to bring forward the gifts that I can bring? And bring forward the gifts that I can bring on behalf of all that I'm most devoted to. And it will also lead to deeper results, as well as being something we can sustain for longer. And also, it will lead us to more unexpected places. Discipline that's driven by ego, we tend to have like a set list of goals and accomplishments we want to reach. And while those can be certainly useful for motivation and measurement in some ways, discipline that's based on reverence and on attention becomes a process that can lead us into the unexpected. If we keep being curious about what happens if I go more deeply into this practice, what happens if I go more deeply into this experience, then we end up in surprising and beautiful places.
Very well said. So, if men treated their training as a form of devotion rather than domination, how would that reshape our world?
Reshape it profoundly. It's interesting, it brings me to something about the nature of testosterone as a molecule that neuroscientist Robert Sapolsky talks about. And he says, for a long time, people thought that testosterone was all about aggression and competition. But it turned out that that's because those are what's most rewarded in this culture, and those are the goals that men have been trained to have in this culture. But that actually, if we take a broader view, what testosterone is about driving us to succeed at whatever cultural game we're playing. And so he said, for example, if you gave a bunch of Buddhist monks a huge increase of testosterone, they would suddenly be motivated to go deeper in their meditation and be more compassionate to more other beings than any other monk had ever been. Because that's the cultural game they'd be playing. And they'd be motivated towards being part of that cultural game. And so the cultural game that we're playing depends on what we value, what we're devoted to. And so, in that ancient way of being devoted to the land and the people, the more we develop our physical capacities, and the more we, and the more that shift toward more muscle brings us into having healthier testosterone, the more we will go into trying to do the best we can to accomplish that new goal that we set ourselves toward. And so, what we're focused on matters tremendously and changes the result.
Yeah, and I think that's the reason why they suppress testosterone so much, in terms of why men's T levels are so low now, where men just aren't really men now. Men out of shape, lack confidence, no self-belief. A lot of men don't work hard, don't show up in the world, are not really good partners or fathers, and I think there's a real link to the testosterone and this way of being for the modern man,
Right. And yet, in the men who have high testosterone, because the context and the goal are wrong, they also end up in imbalanced places, because they end up trying to win at a game they shouldn't have been playing to begin with.
Yeah. So this is the thing. The whole world is upside down. So what do you believe is the spiritual illness at the root of modern civilization's burnout?
Disconnection. And fundamentally, the disconnection from the rest of life. And the cultural amnesia that makes us forget that we are here on behalf of everyone and everything. And that convinces us instead that we are these isolated individuals in competition with each other.
Yeah, there's certainly disconnection on every level, even disconnection with self, which is, I think, is one of the biggest ones, because I think we just don't know ourselves. And I think this is why Yeshua said, know thyself. I think that was one of his most profound teachings, know thyself.
Right.
So that just basically confirms your point, what you said of disconnection, because if you don't know thyself, it means then you're disconnected. And what you're saying is disconnection is the root cause for modern civilizations is burnout,
Yeah.
So
exactly.
What role does ancestral reconnection play in our collective healing?
Yeah, when we reach back to the ancestors who are living in a healthy and balanced way, we begin to reconnect with the dream of who they hoped their descendants would be. And that dream is a healthier dream, and so that reshapes us and reshapes our world. But also can heal what happened in between. Because when we're connecting with those deeply healthy ancestors, and they're sending forward that loving vision, and we're sending back our love and gratitude, it flows through all the generations between, and they receive healing too. It's like we have in our culture the sense that time moves in a straight line, and that the past is the past and can't be changed. But that's not really how it is. Even physics tells us that time and space are curved and exist in a great unity. And so bringing ourselves into alignment with those who dreamed the world differently and engaging in the dream that's the reawakening continuation of their dream can change the past.
What you said just now literally triggered that nursery rhyme. Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Merrily, 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 life is but a dream.
Mm-hmm.
And I have done some ayahuasca ceremonies that show me time and space are literally one. And, science is actually, at least I should say quantum physics is showing that that's the case, that everything exists together. There's no separation. The past, the present, and the future are all the same. It's just a matter of the observer and the how you perceive it. And there's this thing called bending reality. So I think that this is why I use the saying now, life is a massive mystery, because I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday, and And my friend asked me, so what is your view on life? And I said, well, you know what? From doing this podcast, my views have changed so much that I can only say now life is a massive mystery. And every time you think that you have it figured out, boom, you get a beat down. Then, and my mate says, you get the pain, you get the lesson, and then comes the wisdom. And it seems to be this cycle, which is, again, another trinity that comes. And when you look back at it, the wisdom that you have now, in most cases, it came from a painful event or experience or something that was of a disappointment or a letdown or something. And what he said is true, right? Like, you get that experience. In that moment, it is perceived as bad. You get a lesson or reflection where, like, okay, if I had done this or if I'd said that, X, Y, Z. And then further reflection gives you the wisdom. So that means you have a collection of information that is stored away that is like, oh, if X occurs in Y condition, I apply Z and that's the solution. But if it is not exactly the same, I can apply Y1 instead of just Y. That would give me Z1. So it is, this is why life is just a massive mystery. And I think we're only now starting to crack the surface of what it really is, you know? So if every listener could do just one thing today to begin that healing relationship with the earth, what would it be?
It'd be find the single tree that draws your attention and calls to you, and begin every day walking to that tree and spending just a few minutes with it, and bring your attention and your gratitude to it, and watch the way in which your life and your world become restructured in response.
Okay. And what gives you hope about where humanity is headed, despite the chaos of our times?
All of the cruelty that we're witnessing in the world is from the grand view not only of history of the earth, but even of human history. It's only been here for a short time. So if we talk about 500 years or 6,000 years, that sounds like a long time. And we look at things that have persisted for that long and say, they've been here forever. That's just the way humans are. But it's actually not true. Most of humans, throughout most of history, lived in balance and connection. And so from the broader view, everything we're moving through is kind of like a cold that you have for 4 or 5 days. And one way or another, the living world is going to move through that. And we get to choose what role we want to play in that.
So basically, we are the masters of our universe.
Yes, but only when we allow the universe to be the master of us.
Very well said. Very interesting. I guess it's really a symbiotic relationship where we're the masters of the universe, but the universe masters us by giving us teachings, guides, nudging us in the right direction. And it is our job to listen to the calls, the voice, that guidance that comes in the form of, if it's a person or it's a podcast or it's the trees or in your case, the plants, you know, so then you can become an even better master and steward of this planet and of ourselves, of our species, of our existence, because, you know, just our existence here is, I guess you say, a miracle of creation. If you really dig down deep enough, you would say we shouldn't even really be here, but just through divine intervention we are,
Absolutely.
So finally, what does the conscious man mean to you?
It means showing up in relation with everyone and everything in our lives and taking responsibility for what we bring to those relationships.
Okay. So basically, responsibility is the main tenet then for being being a conscious man.
Yes. But responsibility in its literal sense of ability to respond and being part of that call and response, that singing back and forth.
Okay. And the thing is, I find that today a lot of men just don't take responsibility. And responsibility is the thing that is like the glue of the society, because if you're always passing the buck, then who does the buck actually stop with?
Right.
So, we have to start to take responsibility for ourselves, our actions, our words, our deeds, our thoughts, and
Absolutely.
that way then we can really become the conscious man.
Yes.
So, Seán, it's been a very interesting conversation talking to you today, a very different type of conversation that I normally have, but one that I'm sure will add a lot of value. And so please tell the lovely people at the Conscious Man 7 where they can find you, how to find your books, how they can communicate with you, if you do any coaching or any of that kind of good stuff. What you got going on, and plug anything that you wish to.
Thank you. Absolutely. So my website is otherworldwell.com. And through that website, you can find links to my books. You can also find information about the classes I offer. Every Sunday night, I spend a couple of hours talking about some theme connected to healing and myth and plants and consciousness. Different theme every week according to what's showing up in the world. And I also do offer individual consultations about connecting with plants and with ritual to shift your life, whether that be physical healing or spiritual transformation or deepening your connection with the ancestors and with the living world. I work with each person as they show up and connect them with the plants and ancestors and spirits who show up for them. And so you can find me there, and I'd love to work with any and all of you. And I'm so grateful for this conversation and for the work that you're doing.
Yes, thank you. And, I find that right now we are on the precipice of something incredible. And I really love doing this podcast because I have grown a lot. I've learned a lot. And what I hope with this podcast is that it becomes a library of some of the greatest minds on earth. And I'm actually going to rephrase that. This podcast will become the library for the greatest minds on this earth, because the conversations that I am having are absolutely remarkable. And I get messages from all over the world with people telling me that, they've had great growth. They find it very interesting, my guests and stuff. So yeah, Seán, I think we've unpacked a lot today. And guys, as Seán was saying today, getting into shape is an important part of your journey to become the conscious man, to become a better person, and to have a better connection with the things that are in the unseen, including the plants. So, with that being said, I help spiritually inclined people burn fat and build muscle. So if you would like to start a fitness journey, you would like to get into the best shape of your life, but you just don't know how to do that, and you would like to learn how to eat, how to train, how to grow spiritually, and basically level up in all areas of your life, hit me up on my Instagram at Adriano_246, or my name, Todd Cave, on Facebook, and send me a message and let's see if you're a good fit for the Compound Body Training Army. And if you are on a spiritual journey or you would like to start a spiritual journey and you would like some help removing some fears and traumas, I can help you to get some magic mushrooms. So again, hit me up on my socials at Adriano_246 or my name, Todd Cave, on Facebook. And let's get some magic mushrooms in your hand so that you can get a deeper connection with yourself and remove some fears and traumas. If you would like to support this podcast, you can do that by visiting our merch store. We have some cool tank tops, hoodies, shirts, and sweats. Link will be in the description of this podcast to our Amazon store, Todd and Me. And today I have on the Todd and Me flagship shirt. So you can see that here today. So if you want to head over to our Amazon store, you can grab a shirt and join the Conscious Man 7 crew. And this helps us in the podcast with editing and also doing some research to get some more great, amazing guests like Seán. Now, if you also would like to support this podcast and none of those other things resonate with you, but you really hate ads and stuff, because obviously our show has ads, you can become a member of our Patreon or our locals community, and you will get all the podcasts ad-free. And also you will get direct access to me, and you get some cool perks like behind the scenes stuff. Like as of recording this video, I will be doing an ayahuasca retreat in 3 days. So all Patreon and locals members will be getting the full walk and talk the day after I do the first ceremony. And I would only put a teaser on all the major podcast platforms, but locals and Patreon members will get all of full, unedited, uncensored, and no ads, basically. And it will be an exclusive video for all locals and Patreon supporters. And I'm very interested to see what the ayahuasca shows me this time, because it's been a year since I've visited her. So link to the Patreon and locals will also be in the description of this podcast. And if this conversation stirred something in you, share it. Tag a friend who's on their own healing path. Subscribe to the Conscious Man 7 podcast for more deep, soul-driven conversations like this one. Because the more we listen, the more we remember. We're not separate from the earth. We're made from her. This has been another episode of the Conscious Man 7 podcast, where we go deep into the stories, the teachings, and even folklore to touch, move, and inspire you to go deep inside of yourself to make the changes you know that you must make to heal your fears and traumas. Seán, many thanks for being a guest on the Conscious Man 7 podcast. It was an awesome conversation, and I'm sure that we, added great value today. So until next time, folks, remember, keep smiling, keep shining, and keep being the change you want to see. Speak to you soon. Cheers and namaste.